Scaling a business isn't all glossy headlines and overnight success. It's messy, it's tough, and it's full of lessons that no one warned you about. I'm Nikki Jupp, the founder of Talent Gateway, and I've helped over 100 scale-up leaders to build the right team to enable them to grow with confidence. This is Scaling Stories Unfiltered, where founders, CEOs, and leaders share what really happens behind the scenes. No fluff, no filler, just honest conversations to help you grow smarter. So let's get into it.
A lot of people talk about it as the family feel. I don't think it's necessarily that, but you get a sense of actually it's when you've founded a business, there are principles that you founded it on, and that's at the core of it. And you want to hold on to some of that because it is what makes the business that particular business, that particular flavour. And there's just something about founder-led businesses that you always find that at its core.
On today's episode of Scaling Stories Unfiltered, I'm joined by Monica Collings, an experienced CEO and board leader with a truly squiggly career path. From founding a marine business to navigating energy mergers, Monica has scaled and led through some of the most turbulent times in the sector. She's passionate about purpose-driven leadership, cultural integration, and creating space for women in male-dominated industries. So, welcome, Monica, to start off with.
Thank you, Nikki.
I am really interested to hear from you about what you've described as a little bit of a squiggly career. Could you walk us through your journey? You've been a founder when you did Elite Marine Services. What sparked that? And then just tell us a little bit about what's the path you've travelled.
Yeah, I talk a lot about having a squiggly career. And most of that is a coming together of personal and professional that has led me in different directions. And I really celebrate and embrace that. I think a lot of people keep their personal and their professional quite separate. But for me, I found that it's propelled me in different directions. So I'm going to go a little bit further back to my school days, because when I first did my GCSEs, I had designs on being an interior designer. I had this whole ambition and this path that I was going to go down, where I was going to be an amazing artist and I was going to design homes. That didn't happen at all. In fact, I had a teacher at the time, he told me that I wasn't good enough to take A-level art. And so all of my ambition and passion was sucked out of me at that point. And I ended up doing a degree in business and marketing. And I worked at Mercedes alongside doing my degree in a very sexy world of van commercial marketing. And it was a real insight and interesting time in my life, because I worked in a very male-dominated sector, but I was exposed to a lot of amazing opportunities. And I worked with London ad agencies and I loved that. And that's where I ended up starting out my career after I finished my degree. And it was there that I met my first husband, and it was through him that we started the business. So he was a marine engineer, it was his idea. And I helped him alongside whilst I was building out my early stage of my career, that we had this idea, let's do our own gig and see how that plays out. And I suppose of the two of us, I was very structured and organised, and I had all the skills around communication and go-to-market and growth. And he had all of the technical skills. And so this sort of the marriage that we had in a professional sense came together, and the business grew quite quickly. But at the same time, then it was like in the early sort of 2000s going into the recession, that ultimately is what ended up killing the business, because overnight companies changed their payment terms and it just became a real crunch point. So having gone through lots and lots of very early stage growth, it then led into this really dark period of having to essentially close the business. And then I ended up going into all sorts of different directions with my career, which took me into automotive, property, retail, home improvement, and then energy. So that's the squiggliness that sort of came alongside that personal moment.
Really interesting. And I guess there's got to be that sort of spark, that entrepreneurial spark in you, and you clearly like challenge. And where do you think that comes from?
I think that when I look at everything that I've ever done in my career and my personal life and the things that I'm interested in, creativity is really important to me, but so is growth and growing and nurturing, whether it's in my voluntary roles, there's a lot around mentoring and education and nurturing my children. From a growth perspective, I love gardening. I have animals. Through COVID, I had a bit of a farm and I had pigs and chickens and all these things that I decided it was a great idea to go and use as light relief in my garden. And so it's always been there, this curiosity to develop and grow and nurture things. And when I later on in my career found myself divesting a business and doing exactly the opposite of that, it was quite a challenging time in my life. And it was really interesting because I learned so much about myself going through that process in terms of motivation. So I think when we are navigating our careers, the point at which we become really comfortable with what motivates us and where our strengths and we lean in, then we become much more comfortable and we can then embrace that to be successful in the ways in which authentically align with our values and our purpose.
And very eloquently put. So thank you for that. I very quickly want to, because obviously the podcast is all about scaling and leadership and challenges, and I just want to dig into one of the areas in your career where you were brought in as CEO at a real sort of pivotal moment, both in terms of market changes and in terms of where the business was as well, in terms of integration. So tell us about your role with So Energy, for those listeners who don't know much about it, and what was it like to come in as a CEO, for example, who hadn't founded the business, and what challenges does that bring and opportunities?
Yeah, we can. So I joined ESB Group, which is a major international energy business and works across retail and generation and networks and all sorts of facets of the energy spectrum. And I was brought in to lead their energy retailer in the UK, ESB Energy. And they had quite big ambition for that business in terms of wanting to scale it. And you can scale a business organically, or you can scale a business through acquiring and bolting on. And ultimately, we had to do both. And the market was going through a significant amount of change at the time. Energy retailers that were either falling out of the market or were coming up for sale. And so the merger with So Energy was very much based on a cultural alignment, an opportunity to scale both businesses by bringing them together. So this concept, which has widely been talked about across the sector as being better together. That's the label that we attach to it, right?
Yeah.
The opportunity to take the best bits of two businesses, put them together, and then to end up with almost this super company, this super challenger that could come in and really shake up the landscape. And through that acquisition, through the negotiation, the M&A transaction, I got very close to the two co-founders. And I built a really nice relationship with them that then meant ultimately when ESB said, hey, we want our own CEO to come in and run this business, I'd already established a platform of trust with them because I talked very heavily about a deal that was based on cultural alignment and values. We had a lot in common and it made things easier as we then entered the next phase of the journey of So Energy. And we agreed that we would operate under that name, under that banner, because it was important to the lads, but also it made sense strategically. And I found that with businesses in that similar sort of stage, and I've seen this through my board career as well, you have to create the balance of the right entrepreneurial spirit that gives you the growth and the agility. But at the same time, for the size of organization that you then become and the ambition that you have for the next stage of the journey, you have to develop the right framework in terms of governance and structure. And if you don't get those two things absolutely in sync and right, then you lose something. So you can either lose that spirit that drives the business forward and allows it to be entrepreneurial and successful by innovating, or you lose the ability to put structure around an organization that keeps it safe. particularly when you then end up with, let's say, 500-600 people, you cannot operate in the way that you did when you were 50 to 100 people and you are more entrepreneurial. Having said that, you don't have to be this big, rigid corporate. You just have to make sure that there is an appropriateness to the type of governance that you put in place. And I think my background, having been in big corporates and seeing how you do it well, but also having that balance of recognizing what it's like to be a founder and in that space and trying to preserve a lot of people talk about it as the family feel. I don't think it's necessarily that, but you get a sense of actually it's when you've founded a business, there are principles that you founded it on, and that's at the core of it. And you want to hold on to some of that because it is what makes the business, that particular flavor. And there's just something about founder-led businesses that you always find that at its core.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to dig a little bit there because I've seen firsthand lots of failed integrations. And I think culture is one of the things I would put near the top of the list that isn't given enough attention. So for anyone listening who is considering acquiring, being acquired, as in selling, integrating with another business, what are some pointers that you might share or lessons learned around whether it's maintaining your culture or adapting it? Anything around that, words of wisdom, given the amount of times that the experience you've got?
Yeah, so culture is often talked about as a thing. Say, what's the culture? Summarize the culture for me. I think culture is closer to a set of feelings. It's underpinned by values that you should be able to clearly articulate and that everyone in an organization should be able to. Also reinforced by a set of behaviours, things that are familiar and acceptable, and also equally things that are off track and not acceptable. It's the sort of how we do things around here, that familiarity. It's also about then the rituals that go alongside that. So how you shortcut things, because organizations that have a common set of beliefs and ways of operating are far more agile and responsive and dynamic to environmental and external factors because they have that commonality. And I believe that then if you reward organizational behavior and performance on the basis of all of that, that's how you get to a brilliant culture. So you recognize and reinforce and reward the things that work for that business and celebrate those. And all of that rituals, behaviors, values, recognition, reward. And it makes the culture of an organization what it is. So I think that's really important to reinforce, first of all, because then when you are doing mergers and you are integrating organizations, you can buy any business and you can integrate them, but you have to recognize that you're on a journey and bringing those two organizations together. Culturally, there will be pinch points. And if they're closer together in having commonality, it's easier to integrate them. You have to be clear about your expectations and what is and isn't acceptable, and what it allows people to do, particularly when you're bringing people across, whether that be cheaply or other ways. They have to self-select. They have to decide, is this culture for me? Is this the right place, the next home that I have in terms of the environment where I feel a strong sense of belonging or not? And for me, there is something about being really clear in your articulation of that, even in early stage recruitment processes or when you're making senior hires, that if you are not clear about it, then you can end up with all sorts of challenges later down the line. So culture is probably, when I look at board roles, for example, it's the number one thing that I look at, because you have to feel like there's a really strong sense of purpose, alignment, and that you can sign up to something that you feel a connection to.
So for people listening Can you bring that to life? Give me an example of a value that might have been, or some values that were in a company you've worked on, and they were so clear. And because I think sometimes the culture, it still gets lost in discussion. People talk about the way you behave. Are we talking about process and how you deliver work? So just give me a little bit more colour.
Okay. So if we look at the energy sector more generally, broadly at the moment, so energy companies were absolutely detested through the energy crisis. Everyone hated things because we were hiking up prices. There was a lot of debt mounting, there's volatility. And through that time, when you look at your values and your culture, it should guide your decision making and the way in which you operate. So if you say, for example, that you are a business that cares, then through that crisis, you would lobby government on behalf of consumers around policies that you believe are going to help them, for example. And you would spend time and effort and energy focusing on some of those things. If you were a business that were operating sustainably, so sustainability is a value.
Yep.
You would think really carefully before you decided to remove all your green tariffs, because that could have been an easier option for you, could have been a more cost-effective option. But yet you uphold a value of sustainability, and therefore you would be very thoughtful about how that would play out. So it guides the decisions that you make in terms of the way you show up to your consumers, the way that you show up to your employees. Because if you have, in that example, employees that have joined the business on the basis of it being a green energy business, for example, then you change your policy on that. Those employees are going to question the integrity with which you're operating. Businesses make difficult decisions all the time. You have to. But for me, there's something about how your culture and the values that you uphold guide the decisions that you make. That also plays out into internal decisions, not just out external and reputational. It plays out into, for example, your supply chain and the types of businesses that you engage with, or the way in which you treat your employees and the decisions that you make around remuneration, for example, all sorts of things. But it's fundamentally, it should be a lens through which you look at, and that all of your decision making comes back to being informed by.
That's great, thank you. And that I think that is hugely helpful, because I think particularly at the smaller end of businesses, when they're transitioning from early stage growth, say 20 people, and they're taking that first foray into scaling a business, up until that point, things like culture have just emerged in many businesses, not all. There are some founders that are really on it from the beginning, and they know the kind of business that they want to grow from a cultural perspective. But I think for many founders, it is something that is often talked a lot about, but it almost feels a little bit something that they can't get hold of. So I think hearing that really does bring it to life and make sense and is practical.
There's a really interesting thing, Nikki, that I think when we look at founder-led businesses and the transition to scaling, my experience is that there are different types of CEO that are needed at different points in a business's journey. And the founder leads that business to a point and then recognizes that actually they may not be the right person to lead it beyond. And it doesn't mean that they failed. It doesn't mean that they're not wonderful. And actually, as a founder, there is a role for them to play within that business. There's all sorts of methodologies. We talk about the founder-led sales techniques and all of the kind of approaches that you can adopt. But if you are successfully going to scale and you are on a big growth journey, sometimes you have to just get comfortable that you have to hand your baby over and that someone else has to take it on the next stage of the journey. And part of that evolution of culture is keeping the good bits and then adding the bits that you need in order to make that transition to the next stage successful.
Yeah. And interesting, that piece you were talking about, being able to build process, system, the legal side, make the business more robust for that next phase. without strangleholding that entrepreneurial spirit, as you said, in the culture. So let's stick with challenges around scaling a business. And now let's just stick with So Energy. But of course, you've got a wealth of experience. Feel free to bring in other examples. What are some of the really big hurdles that stick in your mind that really challenged you both on a professional and a personal level, because they were really deeply uncomfortable and challenging?
So I think whenever you look at how you scale businesses and the challenges that you face, it's through the lens of what is going to be right for this business in the short term and the long term, and how do you marry the horizons? Because you've got a strategic direction that you're trying to take business in, and you need to have everyone aligned to that. But at the same time, you've got short-term deliverables that you're trying to achieve. So I often talk about a bus analogy and the idea that we're all on this bus and we're all going in the same direction. We're all facing the front. We all have our seatbelts fastened. We're all listening to the same song on the radio. We all trust the bus driver. We all know where we're going. We all know the route that we're taking. So the analogy goes on because you are all beautifully aligned. And then a tree trunk falls in front of the bus and it blocks the road and you have to divert around it. But because you trust your bus driver, you know that you're going to go round, you're going to go on a different route, but you're still going to end up at the same place, still going the same direction. And you have faith that's going to be okay. And you might have a few passengers hop off on the way, and then you might get all of that sort of stuff. And I think when I look at the energy crisis, we had to almost at the point where, with So particularly, the deal was done, the transition was happening in terms of the migration and bringing those two businesses together. And then Putin started messing around with energy prices and we were off again because the crisis happened. And then the government started implementing all of these schemes that suppliers had to develop in collaboration and then implement with the customers. So much was done at breakneck speed and so much was done in a way it had never been created before. It was all brand new. And so you're trying to desperately deliver outcomes for your shareholders and for your customers and for your regulator and for your government, and you're managing all these different stakeholders. At the same time, you've just completed a deal. You're trying to deliver a transition and all of this other work and keep the business going. And you're looking at 35 companies failing and falling out of the market across that period. There was a lot of challenge at that time. But the only way of being able to get through it, and my leading an organisation through it, was to get everyone aligned on that bus and to have that strong sense of purpose, to have that clarity over direction of travel, and to bring everyone on that journey in a way that meant that they were comfortable and cared for and that they understood the direction of travel, even though almost on a weekly basis, those tree trunks kept falling down.
Yeah. And on a personal level, that must be incredibly challenging to have that much thrown at you. Talk to me about the importance of a good team around you.
Oh, so important. And the diversity within that team, so that you are covering your blind spots, recognizing where you need additional advice, support, scrutiny, challenge, help. I believe you've got a team in those situations that is tight because you are sharing experiences in a way that you form bonds and that you just don't have when you are running a business that's going and everything's fine. You don't have that adversity that binds you. At the same time, as the CEO, you are in a position where you are incredibly lonely because you've got this pressure from the top, you've got the pressure from below and externally and everything coming at you. You are the only one of your kind and you are responsible for everyone and everything from the bottom line to whether the toilets work. And you are entirely on your own. And so having a strong personal board, which is something that I really buy into as a concept, is really important, because you must have someone who checks in on your well-being. You must have a cheerleader who always picks you up when you feel low. You must have a coach that can be your thinking partner, the connector that knows absolutely everybody. And if you need an introduction, they can make that for you. The mentor who's been there and done it and seen it all before and can tell you the pitfalls and things to watch out for before you even see them. So all of these amazing people that can do this work for you, because otherwise you end up in a situation where you are trying to be as resilient as you possibly can for a sustained period, but yet you are constantly trying to self-moderate and check where you are. Have you got the right balance? Are you showing up in the right way? Have you looked after yourself enough by putting your own oxygen mask on first, almost? Just another analogy, but this idea that you have to be there for everyone else. How do you make sure you're there for yourself too?
And what about hiring people? I guess growing that team around you. Ultimately, we're talking here about your leadership team. Talk to me about any hiring mistakes you might have made along the way. How did you know it was a mistake? What were the telltale signs? And what was the path you took? Was there sunshine and rainbows at the end of it, or were there some tough decisions that needed to be made?
Not necessarily a hiring mistake, but someone within my executive team previously, and absolutely wonderful individual, amazing person, in the wrong job.
Yeah.
So inherited them into that role, and so fantastically capable, but just in a role that meant that they were not flourishing. And I see it often with executive teams that you have individuals who are fantastic, capable individuals, but you put them in a role where they are out of their depth or they are strained because they don't necessarily have the capabilities that they need, and also are not necessarily open to developing, or you have them in the wrong environment. So we've talked a lot about scaling businesses. You can't put everyone into a scaling business and for them to succeed. It just doesn't work. So I worked in big corporates and then transitioned, and I had to adapt in order to be successful to do that. Some people try and take that big corporate methodology and apply it, and it stifles founder-led business because that level of agility and that sort of governance isn't right. Equally, the other way around, you take entrepreneurial people and you put them into incubators in other organizations, and it doesn't work because you've got big corporate methodologies and they can't apply them. Yeah. So I think for me, that's one of the biggest mistakes that exec teams often make. The other one is really hiring too fast or firing too soon. And we see that again. With founder-led businesses particularly, there's a strong sense of loyalty, and often the founders brought people in, or that people have grown up with the organisation. But again, are they ready for the next stage of that journey? Not always.
Yeah. And that leads beautifully on to, you're a huge advocate for diversity and inclusion. I'm going to ask the blindingly obvious question: why so passionate about it?
So I was the only female chief exec of an energy retailer, domestic retailer, during the crisis. And going into a lot of those conversations as the only woman in the room, it doesn't matter how confident you are, how capable, you are marginalised. You are the only one of your kind. And there is a weight that comes with that, where whether you want to be the poster girl or not, you are. And you carry the weight of all womankind into that room with you. And you are conscious that you are a role model and that people are looking up to you and that they have an ambition to be like you one day. And I've talked to a lot of people in the next sort of generation that are coming through in their very early stages of their careers. And they actively look at organisations and they Google and see who are the female senior leaders, because they want to check that those organisations are investing in women and that they have potential and that there are career routes for them to take. And My experiences as a female CEO were not always positive. I was ignored. I was propositioned indecently, and other things that happened that should not have happened to me. And if they happened to me, then they happened to other people. And so I fiercely advocate for particularly gender diversity, but diversity in all kinds and inclusive environments, because I believe it makes our organisation stronger because we are representing customers better. I also believe it helps with more diverse thinking, which means that we end up with stronger organisations. But also, I just genuinely believe that particularly in these organisations, and throughout my career, I've found myself in traditionally male-dominated environments, that the environments haven't necessarily moved on in a way that should welcome women into them. And it's really simple things that we have a responsibility to address and to make sure that we transition and that we change because it is the right thing to do. So an example is visiting a site and there being no bins in the toilets for women to dispose of sanitary products. If you think of a young woman in her career coming out of that toilet, having to hide a used sanitary product, bumping into a male colleague in the corridor who wants to shake their hand, can you imagine the embarrassment that those women face? That is still happening in the energy sector today, and it shouldn't be. And so my role as chair of Powerful Women is using my experiences, my lived experiences, but also my voice to try and advocate for a better, more inclusive sector that addresses some of the challenges and barriers that these women are facing today.
Yeah. And again, a really obvious question. Why do you think it's still there? What are some of the real sort of grassroots issues that cause us not to have moved on so much?
It's a really great question. And I suppose we've empowered the next generation of women who are now very capable of asking for what they want, but we have not at this point got a critical mass of women.
Yeah.
And so we still have a sector which is dominated by men who don't always necessarily understand the issues and challenges. Women are different. They have different needs. It's not to say that women are better than men or anything else. It's just that the needs are different. We haven't tackled the bias around flexibility that really unlocks a lot of opportunity for women, particularly those who have additional caregiving responsibilities with children or parents. We haven't shifted traditional models to value the contributions that women make sufficiently, and that holds back. And so some of the mechanisms that already exist for men, for example, men have a critical mass and therefore they are already part of a tribe. Women don't necessarily have those tribes. They don't have a way of supporting each other and enabling them to have safe psychological spaces where they can challenge and they can be empowered and successful in the way in which they operate. They're just not automatically there. And so I think that addressing some of those root challenges is the only way in which we are going to be able to make significant progress. And in a couple of weeks, I think we're going to be sharing the latest Powerful Women State of the Nation report, which highlights progress across the sector every year, and we chart progress. The target is to reach 40% representation of women in senior leadership and middle management positions in the next 5 years. A lot needs to change in the next 5 years if we're going to achieve those numbers.
Yeah. And I think for me, that it's the voice piece. It very much feels like the voice piece. Your example then about coming out of the toilet. I think most of the men that I've met throughout my career, none of them would intentionally, I'm fortunate, I guess, in that situation, none of them would intentionally go out of their way to not be supportive. They want the best person for the role, etc., etc. But they don't live the experience of a woman. So in many cases, they don't know. And so I think your point is a fantastic one around that critical mass. So one's eyes can be open to some real basics where a big difference can be made.
I think so, because at the moment we're in a position where men still hold the balance of power.
Yeah.
And we are trying to navigate what has been traditionally masculine driven structures as women. And for me, there is something about the fact that this is a really exciting sector. The energy sector is hugely exciting. There is lots of opportunity. There are amazing roles for people to come in, women to come in and do.
Yeah.
However, when they land here, their experiences are not always supportive or positive. And so they're battling. And then you get to a point where you go, actually, should I have to battle this hard in order to be heard or to be successful? And I can go somewhere else. I can go and work in retail where there's more women than men, and it's easier. And so you're talking about retention and the friction points that we're trying to reduce that enable that to happen. I hold a lot of optimism and hope and positivity about it, because when we look at the fact that we need so many green skills and we need to attract such a huge number of new women, people, talent into the sector, the potential for those people to be women is higher, because we do need new skills. It's just, how do we make sure that when we get them in, we hold on to them?
Yeah. I used to call it, particularly thinking about not all, but women who do leave to have a family and take time out. I did that myself. I used to describe it as a little bit of an hourglass. Lots of females are in the education system, pretty even, sometimes in more cases, they're getting degrees, etc., etc. When you have a family, it just pinches everything. And then it's harder to go back into senior roles.
Yeah.
You're then taking a step into possibly a part-time role, a more junior role with less hours. And it's just tougher. It's just genuinely tougher to make the level of seniority, those jump, when you take time out.
Yeah. There was a lovely phrase that a woman that I was talking to used, and she said that she had a career that was punctuated by pregnancies. For that very point, that she just paused. And when I think about my squiggly career, so my first marriage failed. I was a single mom. I had to take a 30% pay cut to get the flexibility that I needed to be able to go and do the nursery runs at the time when my daughter was very young. I had both my children by C-section. I had to have 6 surgeries because neither was straightforward. And so I had to take time out to have my body repaired. 2 after my daughter, 2 after my son. I ended up with my ovary being removed in the final surgery. And then that took me into early menopause. And so then I had to deal with all of the emotional and physical symptoms attached to that. And people say, how can you have it all? How can you do all of this? How did you have 2 children going through exams during the energy crisis and all the rest of it? And I always think about it in a pendulum way. Your life swings and you have the balance between your personal and then your professional, and you're trying to get that right. Sometimes it swings more that you spend more time in your professional world and you neglect your family a little bit, and then the other way. But you overall, incrementally over the years, if you look at the average, you get it just about right, but not without sacrifice. So you can have it all, but not without compromise, and you can't have it all at the same time.
Yeah. And I often say to my daughters, you can have it all, but you have to learn what your role is, because it's not the same as somebody else's. And it's just taking some time to reflect on that. So just moving off topic a little bit and really looking at sort of leadership evolution. And if you look back and see yourself as you are now, having held multiple senior roles now in advisory positions, if people are listening about sort of personal development, how would you describe how you've grown? If you look back and where you are now, what's changed in terms of how you approach things from a leadership perspective?
I would say that I am authentic in the way in which I operate. So as a leader, I got very comfortable in my own skin with my own style. So having grown up in advertising agencies, communication is a really big thing for me, and how I communicate. And it really is fundamental to everything that I do, and the way in which I interact with people. And lots of leaders get that wrong, in my view, because they don't learn as a fundamental skill how important communication is. So I have a mantra: communicate until you vomit, because I just think that you can't over communicate. Really, it's very hard to in most situations, particularly in adverse situations. It's almost virtually impossible to over communicate. And over the years, as I've worked in these male-dominated environments, I've tried to adopt male characteristics to fit in, because that's what I thought that you had to do as a woman. You had to be like that. But as I've got older, I've just become a little bit less tolerant of that, and think I should be able to do it my way and get comfortable with that. Lots of female leaders don't realise that soon enough, I think. I also believe my own truth. So as a leader, I value the contribution I make and the way in which I do it. So again, I was a CEO that didn't come up through a finance route. I'm not an accountant. I was a communications professional, and my experience is very different. It makes me perfectly well placed for situations of adversity, because those are the skills that you need. If you look at other people in different CEO roles for different businesses, they would have had different skills that would have been appropriate for them at that time. And I think as I've now built my board roles and the portfolio career that I have, there are common threads in how I've constructed it, that the organisations that I work with are all very aligned to my culture and my values, because I just believe that life's too short. If you work with organisations that don't have an alignment with those values, particularly as a board member, you don't spend huge amounts of time together, and so it makes things difficult and uncomfortable. And so being really selective about that. I also am really conscious of the value that I bring and where I spend my time and effort. And I think as leaders, we have a responsibility to people. I think leadership is one of the most privileged positions that you can have, because you are responsible for guiding the careers of other people and guiding decisions in terms of delivering shareholder value. They're big responsibilities. And so when you start out early on in your career and you're given a direct report, the first one, no one really tells you how to look after them or what to do about it. I remember I was a terrible leader, the first person I looked after. And we've all been there, because no one ever gives you a handbook. And actually that lady, she wrote to me on LinkedIn a while back, and she said she got back in touch. And I felt the need to apologise to her for being a terrible leader. And I did say to her, look, I promise I've made it up over the years. I've done better. And she said, oh God, I never thought you were terrible. She said, in fact, I always go back to some of the things you used to say, and I remember them because you taught me so much. And I guess maybe I wasn't as terrible as I thought. Looking back, I think I probably was terrible.
I don't know whether that's just being really hard on yourself. So there's two questions that fall out of that, all of that for me. And we're just going to get them out. So whether top of my mind. One is, what advice would you give either to your younger self or to, I'm going to say an early female stage career individual who wants to be in leadership? And then secondly, whilst it's front of mind, is there's obviously an inner confidence. And I love the way you say, I value the contribution that I bring, and I'm confident of the value that I add. How have you got to that stage? How do you nurture that? So they're the two questions.
It's really hard. I think as I've got older, it's happened, because I do think that there is something about being in what I would call the autumn of your life, where you just feel a little bit more comfortable in your own skin. Even what you choose to wear, the way you walk. I never wear high heels anymore, because I just, again, life's too short. You just wear trainers, and I wear trainers with a suit, and it's fine. You know, right. When I was in my 20s and 30s, I would teeter around in stupid heels and have blisters. But what advice? I think when I say believe your truth, I say that to everybody because I do think there is something about if you don't back yourself, why should anyone else back you? And it's easy to say, but you have to have that fundamental belief in your ability to pick up the phone or drop somebody a LinkedIn message and say, hey, can I have a chat? Because I'd like to have a coffee with you, and not be frightened of it or not be held back by opportunities. Having said that, walking through your career, having fantastic sponsors who can put your name in the right projects and conversations when you're not in the room, for example, is really important, particularly for women, but equally for men as well. But those moments are the ones that really matter because they propel your career in directions that you may not have control over and that can be really impactful. I also think that there are things that you can do personally that help with laddering up to some of those things. For example, at the front of my diary, when I was going through my early years, even as an exec, before I became a non-exec, I'd have a brag list of things that I achieved so that when I got to my end of year review, I didn't forget things, because we are hooked up on giving ourselves a hard time and things that we don't deliver. And our brains, we all know that they're all framed to look at things negatively. But there will be things that you do and that you achieve as you go throughout your year. And it's fantastic, like stuff. It's evidence points. So that when you're up for that promotion and when you're looking at, should I get a bigger bonus or whatever it is, if you don't do a good enough job of selling yourself and that self-PR piece, no one will do it for you. So how do you make it part of your day-to-day and being grateful and recognizing, taking the lessons out of every day and just documenting and just noting down, these are the things that I'm going to do to improve, like journaling. I think people don't start journaling soon enough. All the best execs that I've ever met all journal.
Interesting. Love it. Love it. So I guess just coming back to you, actually, or about you said yes and acknowledged that it's hard. What are your go-tos? How do you stay, whether you call it grounded, being good to yourself? What do you do?
So I buy into the principles of the 7 types of rest. That's my go-to. I think that you have 7 buckets that you need. And if you neglect them, then you cannot be balanced. And it shouldn't be viewed as, hey, these are 7 things that I have to tick and do, and it's added to another list, right? Because that's not the point. But the point is, so creativity is one of those things. And if I find that I haven't been to an art gallery or I haven't sketched something for a while, then I get a bit twitchy. Yeah. If I don't get enough sleep, or if I don't do a bit of yoga every week, or whatever it is that keeps me in check. And there are things that I have learned and developed as coping mechanisms for keeping my resilience high, because ultimately resilience is about your ability to bounce back, not about how much rubbish you can sustain. So if you look after yourself and recognize what you need, and some of that might be time with friends and socializing, some of it might be time on your own to reflect, and some of it might be time in nature or spiritual rest, and all these different types of rest, then you very quickly get a sense of who you are, what makes you effective, and then you can optimize yourself on the basis of what you can do. So if, for example, I have lots and lots of board papers to read, but I'm feeling cooped up in my office, then it might be actually the thing that I need is to go for a walk for half an hour and then come back and read my board papers, because it's more likely to sink in than sit here and go, oh, I've got to plug through and it's endless hours of reading papers.
Yeah. And sticking, I guess, with that topic-ish, any books that you've read throughout your career that stick in your mind, that have been a light bulb's come on, and that you would recommend people read, whether it's business or whether it's personal?
So this is going to be a bit of a curveball book, but my favourite book that I think is the best leadership book that was never written as a leadership book is The Boy, the Fox, the Mole and the Horse.
Oh,
So it is an absolutely beautiful illustration book, and it's by Charlie Maxey, and it has leadership lessons in life, or life lesson. But as a leader, particularly leading through adversity, you can look at any of those pages in that book and go, yeah, there's a lesson in there for me. And I have often stood up on a stage or recorded a podcast or video or something and used a quote from it, because it is just so relevant, and people often quote things back to me. And when I've had people leave organizations, they bought copies of this, but I've got so many copies of this book because I quote it so often. And it is just brilliant. It is just brilliant because it just has something for everybody. And at schools, they read it to like kindergarten and receptions children, because the lessons in it are all basically about the fundamentals of human life, how to be a good person, but how to be a good leader. It translates brilliantly. So yeah, that's my top tip.
oh, that is so wonderful. And I'm so surprised, having got 3 children, that I've never come across the book. No. Oh, that's
Yeah.
definitely one for me then. And I love anything that you can go back to time and time again. So I just have one final question before we close. And the question is, what myth would you bust about leadership? If you could.
So I'm gonna come at this one with to summarize everything that we've talked about and try and bring it into 3 things, I think. The first thing is, leaders often believe that in order for them to progress and develop, it's about taking on more and about how you can sustain and do more. But it isn't. It's about how you can be more efficient with the time that you have and how you spend that time, and the right proportion of that time being spent on people and leading others. So leadership and being a leader is about bringing other people on that journey. And the second part of that is, people often say, I'm ready to be ahead of, or I'm ready to be the next level. For me, you become a leader before you get the title, because you evidence and you demonstrate the right capabilities and the behaviours of leadership. And then you are given the title of almost the reward and recognition that comes alongside that, because you have to earn that. And that comes back to my point about privilege. I think the third thing I would say, as a female leader, there are perceptions that people have about women, whether that be they're less likely to take risks, or they're less ambitious, or they are less strategically minded, or more calculated, all these things. And I know a lot of women who have been really successful because they've adopted male characteristics to try and lead an environment, and then have found that they've burnt out because they are so exhausted.
Yeah.
So I would encourage anyone who is listening, who is a female leader particularly, to just really think about what feels authentic and true to you. And if you are in an environment that compromises on those values and how you feel, then to really think about that, because often we draw analogies to flowers being in wrong environments and all the rest of it and how they thrive. If you find yourself in the right place and in the right role, amazing things happen.
Wow. What can I say? I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I have absolutely not a shred of doubt that anyone who listens or watches this is going to get a huge amount of value from this conversation. I just want to say a big thank you for giving me, us who are listening, your time, your energy, and your knowledge. So a huge thank you from me.
Thank you, Nikki.
My absolute pleasure. That's it for this episode of Scaling Stories Unfiltered. And if you got value from today's conversation, hit the subscribe button and leave a comment. It really helps us more. Than you've got a scale up challenge or a story to share, or even someone that you'd recommend that I should interview. Take a look at the link to the website, or indeed just drop me a message. Until the next time, keep scaling, keep learning, and remember, you're not alone on your scale up journey.